Great, let's make a start. Thank you all very much for coming to our event. We appreciate it. We know there are hundreds of events, all of them sounding very exciting, happening simultaneously at this incredible conference. So we appreciate you carving out some time, especially for us, for what I think will be a really interesting and important discussion around how we finance sustainably and ethically nature-based solutions across the world. So yes, banking on nature-based solutions, opportunities and challenges and barriers to scaling through private investment is the name of our discussion. So quick intro of myself. My name is Natalie Seddon. I'm a professor of biodiversity based in the departments of biology and geography at the University of Oxford. Oh no, I'm going to have to stick next to my microphone, aren't I? I'm also founding director of something called the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, which I established as an interdisciplinary program of research, policy, advice, and education in 2017, just before the dam broke on nature-based solutions. And our main emphasis now is around really consolidating, doing and sharing the scientific underpinnings on the social, ecological and economic effectiveness of working with nature in a warming world. So welcome everyone, and welcome to those of you who are hopefully joining online to this session. It's a great privilege to be moderating this session, not least because we have some really fantastic panelists with a great deal of experience to share on this important topic. So I want to introduce Will Baldwin-Cantello, who's Director of Nature-Based Solutions at WWF UK, who will be representing the Nature-Based Solutions Accelerator. We have joining us also Craig Hansen, who is Managing Director for Programs at the World Resources Institute, and who will be representing the Policy Accelerator under the Nature-Based Solutions Accelerator. We have Lucia Rodriguez Valverde, who is joining us, who is the Climate and Civil Society Support Specialist at BirdLife International, who's representing the Forest Impact Accelerator. We also have a pre-recorded intervention from Fabiana Benitez, who is project coordinator under the CITES program from Guayana, Paraguay, who's representing a project perspective from the Forest Impact Accelerator. And we also have joining us from Australia and online, Diana Calabo, a Chief Investment Officer at Pollination, who will be representing the Terra Carta Accelerator. And here she is on screen. Thanks very much for joining us, Diana. I'm not quite sure what time it is in Australia. I think it might be quite late. Is that right? Okay. So before turning to our panelists, I'm going to give a very brief little sort of overview, a bit of context here. So we're here to discuss nature-based solutions, and particularly exploring the role of the private sector in enabling their scaling. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, so nature-based solutions, in accordance with the UNEA definition, so the multilaterally agreed definition that was agreed at UNEA 5 last year, it's a long definition, so I'm going to give a short version of it. But basically, nature-based solutions are actions that involve working with nature. Thank you so much. That's much better. I usually move around quite a lot when I'm talking, so I was finding this a bit awkward. So nature-based solutions are ways of working with nature as part of nature to address societal goals. Those goals might be climate change adaptation, mitigation, food security, water security, health and well-being, whatever it might be, but in a way to bring benefits to biodiversity and to local communities. And it's important that they bring those benefits in the place where they're situated. Otherwise, those nature-based solutions will not be resilient. They will not be sustainable, especially in a warming world. So, roughly speaking, they involved protecting and restoring our natural and semi-natural ecosystems on land and in the sea, the more sustainable management of our working lands and on our aquatic systems. But they also involve bringing nature into our urban and peri-urban areas through green and blue infrastructure. So a broad range of interventions, but all implemented with the intent to address societal challenges while bringing local benefits to biodiversity and people. So that's sort of where we are in terms of the definition. But the point is that nature-based solutions are place-based partnerships between people and nature. And when it comes to their design, their implementation, their management, their governance, and their finance, there is no one size that fits all. The financing of it, as much as all the other aspects, are extraordinarily place-based. Some programs may be best supported by public funding, some programs by philanthropic, and many by private investment. And many ultimately might need blended forms of finance that bring these different forms of flows of finance to bear over different timeframes and spatial scales. So today we're really going to be looking at the potential role of the private sector, looking at challenges and opportunities. So that's the context for this. I just want to outline the flow of this session this afternoon. So each speaker will be invited to basically present a bit of insight from their experiences with their accelerator programs and the insights and lessons learned so far. Well, then it'd be great to have some inputs and questions and observations from you, our audience. And then there'll be another round of short questions at the end about looking forward. So let me start with you, Will, if I may. Could you briefly please introduce the Nature-Based Solutions Accelerator program and then explain what your team has learned through your work to date in selecting projects to receive funding through the program? Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. So the Nature-Based Solutions Accelerator is a joint initiative between HSBC, WWF, and WRI, and it's part of our larger Climate Solutions Partnership. And our goal is to try and remove the barriers to large-scale implementation of nature-based solutions through accelerating the finance to them. And within that accelerator, WWF is particularly leading on the work to support projects towards investment readiness. And so I'll be presenting some of the lessons learned that we've experienced through that process. Broadly speaking, I'd say we've been through 3 phases as an accelerator on this. First one was building the foundations. The second one was creating the opportunities. And now where we are now, phase 3 is trying to deliver some solutions. So firstly, on phase 1, we did 3 things. We implemented a pilot program of support to 4 nature-based solution projects to kind of learn by doing with them. We also commissioned some research on the barriers, specifically to hear from the finance sector what they describe as the barriers that they see. And then the third thing was, although there are barriers, there has been finance flowing to nature-based solutions. So what were the success factors from those projects that had accessed investment? So just briefly on the barriers, and at the end of the session, or perhaps now, you can see the QR code on screen, which will give you more detail. But just to draw out the 3 top barriers we heard. One was the ability of nature-based solution projects to demonstrate their impact and also to demonstrate their returns. In turn, there was also a barrier in the finance sector in their capacity to actually analyze and understand nature-based solutions opportunities, often leading to a higher level of risk assumed. And then thirdly was just a lack of supply, both the kind of quantity of high-quality nature-based solutions, but also their scale in themselves. Then on the other hand, the success factors that were evident, and again, from the QR code you can find more detail, but the ones that were universal were about a project owner who had a track record of success. There was a conducive policy environment, and they were able to build an effective business case based on economic analysis. That went alongside a offtake agreement or an ability to demonstrate secured market. So with that, as I say, phase 1, building the foundations, we moved into phase 2, which was really designing a package of support that we could offer to nature-based solutions projects and then recruit projects to do that. So in September 2022, we invited expressions of interest to the Nature-Based Solutions Accelerator to receive support. We've reached out to over 100 organizations. And at the end of that process, and I'll come to those in a moment, we have 6 projects that we are now providing support to. But in that process, there were obviously detailed assessments of the projects, but we had 5 core criteria, really. One was a stronger NBS definition. They could meet that definition. The projects could demonstrate they would meet the WWF's environmental and social safeguards framework. They could achieve investment readiness within 18 months to 2 years, which is the time frame we were working towards. They had the potential to scale or replicate, so our impact wouldn't just be that specific project in that specific place. It would be something that could have wider impact. And of course, we needed to know that we had something to offer that was useful to them, so we would add value. So at the end of that, we have 6 projects, as I say. One is scaling up and financing regenerative cattle ranching in Peru with WWF Peru. We have mangrove restoration in Kenya with Valinda. We have a conservancy business model with Platcorp in Kenya. Nature-based solutions to human-elephant conflict in Thailand with ZSL. Sustainable seaweed farming in Philippines with WWF Philippines. And then lastly, one in the UK with a wetland restoration project that is capitalising on a biodiversity net gain policy in the UK. So through that process, there are some lessons that we've recently been extracting at this point, and I'll just highlight 4 quickly now. So first of all, having a really clear definition of nature-based solutions and investment readiness was critical. We received a lot of projects that couldn't demonstrate or couldn't articulate how they would deliver biodiversity benefits, which is obviously a core criterion of the nature-based solution definition. But there are also some confusion over the term. You know, nature-based solutions is increasingly used, but there still are some parallel terms which it gets confused with, like natural climate solutions and so on. Then on the other hand, having a clear definition of investment readiness demystified that for audiences who weren't necessarily very familiar with that. So that clear definition and criteria was helpful. Nonetheless, it was clear that there was low confidence and low capabilities on private finance expertise in the groups that were applying to the accelerator, which both kind of demonstrated the case for what we were trying to do, but also suggested in some cases there was a longer time period needed and different kinds of support, including some more patient financing as well. Thirdly, clearly, at the moment, nature-based solution projects that are reaching investment readiness are largely, for the most part, they're getting revenue from carbon credits or agricultural and forest product sales, sustainable product sales. For this to achieve large scale, we need to kind of diversify the options of revenue systems to nature-based solutions, and that's where I think the policy environment is going to be really, really important. For example, turning what would be avoided loss benefits to the common good into something that could be rewarded with finance. Or indeed some insurance-based packages. Just coming to a close as well. So the other thing we noticed was a huge diversity in nature-based solution developers and practitioners. We had a mix of project developers, small-scale NGOs, large NGOs, and then combinations of that in partnerships. Certainly, there could have been more presence of community-led, indigenous peoples-led projects in there, and so that's something that we would really encourage to be supported to grow in the nature-based solutions area. And so with those projects, we just have the last message, I guess, we draw that we are trying to understand how we can build proof of concept at project level, but in nature-based solutions to be really effective need to be in a good quality, need to be within a landscape context where there is a larger plan in which they operate, whether that's catchment or landscape or so on. But we do think that to build that supply, we need to be working from the bottom up. We can't kind of do this from the top down. So that's what we learned through phase 2. As I say, we're in phase 3 now. We're delivering support to those projects, and we have a few other things in the pipeline which perhaps we'll come into later on.
Thank you very much, Will. Wonderful diversity of projects that you're involved with. So really fascinating to see some of the commonalities between them despite the different contexts and societal challenges that they're addressing. That's really, really interesting. Craig, over to you, if I may. Could you introduce the policy accelerator under the NBS accelerator and really let us know or share with us how WRI is focusing on strengthening the evidence base? Because I think that's really, really critical, isn't it? I mean, it's something that Will referred to as being a factor in their learning too. NBS project metrics and also on the enabling environment focused on policy. And I'm particularly keen to hear your reflections on where policy in particular, national or international, is playing a role in helping projects really access the finance that they really need in the form that they really need it. So
Great. And thank you for the invitation. And I just want to thank HSBC and WEF for this great partnership that we've got in this program that's been articulated here. So the work we do complements, right, the work that Will just talked about here. This is on the policy accelerator, right? Because one thing about nature-based solutions is we're dealing effectively with something that's a bit of a public good. So often it takes policy to play a role to help fill that missing gap, then to let the finance and the private sector interest actually flow. So just going without, going in and thinking you don't need some type of policy oftentimes ends up facing some barriers where actually you do need some policy in there to actually make all this work. And this is what the policy accelerator is all about when it comes to nature-based solutions. And the concept here is essentially this. The policy accelerator is basically it's a program that combines a peer-to-peer learning experience for decision makers involved, whether at the government level or the project level, right? Combined within the research that WRI does on what works, what are the policy options, what doesn't work, what's been tried, what's been proven, what's been disproven, et cetera. So you bring not just the research, but that peer-to-peer. And I want to come back to the power of the peer-to-peer as being super, super important here. So imagine basically a program that you're working at a project in a country like Mexico, right, and trying to do some nature-based solutions in the mangroves. You actually can bring then the policymakers, and whether it's the federal government or the state government, right, together with peers, either within the same country, peers from other countries who have been there and done that, and with experts, whether it's from FAO or Cartier or other organizations that might have some experience in what the solution you're trying to actually implement here. We found that is, and then what Deborah I will do is do the research on what kind of financing, what kind of policy do you put in place to make the financing flow, et cetera. You bring all that together, and that creates the right recipe, right, for actually helping get something going on the ground. So you've got the mentees, you've got the mentors as part of this. It's something we started in Latin America, working basically from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, and now we've spread it across the tropics in terms of where we're actually applying this. And just want to give you a couple examples here of impact, right? So in one case, the teams are working in El Salvador, where they're trying to figure out a new way of financing certain types of restoration, looking at what's been done and tried and true elsewhere in the world, and doing this peer-to-peer exchange. They settled upon an ecosystem compensation scheme, where companies that are having certain types of impacts on the environment actually put money in. The policy gets put in place, put money into a fund that then pays for restoration of equivalent ecosystems, et cetera, right? Which was new for this place where where the initiatives were going on, but they pulled that experience from others and were able to do that. Secondly, Mexico had a situation where in 3 different states, trying to find the investment to help do some restoration of some uplands. And what they did is they actually brought together through the peer-to-peer exchange. The result of that ended up bringing together and negotiating a deal between 3 large-scale farmer organizations, right, farmer associations, that basically brought in $500,000 to basically restore like 9,000 hectares. That downstream, it actually helped benefit the farmlands of 280,000 hectares, right? So that's a 30-fold return in terms of, if you're talking about hectares here. But the inspiration came from the policy accelerator of that analysis and the experience of what's worked elsewhere, because they pulled that idea from somewhere else, right? So key lessons learned, peer-to-peer is super important, right? Especially thinking about on the land. I always say about farmers, who do farmers trust? Another farmer, right? Who do land managers, who do local communities trust? Another land manager, not someone flying in from some western city, right? It's the peer-to-peer. Who do policymakers trust? Another policymaker like them, right? So that's super important. And secondly, success breeds success. And that's one thing we've been doing is a lot of it, highlighting what's working somewhere else, because that's what people will gravitate to.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. And I think there's so much, that's a real thing in the zeitgeist, isn't it? That peer-to-peer learning and the need for us to connect all these lessons and success stories across the planet. And thinking about much more broadly, you referred to sort of landscape scale effects and how you can amplify the good you do locally by having a landscape approach. So I'm slightly distracted by it. Sounds like there's some sort of major demonstration going on outside. The drums are beating. So thanks very much, Craig. That was great. I'm sure we'll come back to that. I'm sure there'll be some questions around some more of the details around what you shared, but that was really, really interesting. So moving on now to Lucia, it would be really good to hear more about the Forest Impact Accelerator, and see if you could share some of your insights from what you've gained by being involved in that, to complement what's been said so far. Thank you.
Is this working? Yeah, it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Lucia Rodriguez Valverde. I'm the Climate and Civil Society Support Specialist at BirdLife International. Apologies for the lengthy title. For those of you who doesn't know BirdLife is the biggest partnership of nature in the world. We have over 119 partners all around the world, and this is super exciting because our voices are being heard throughout all the regions. And I want to talk about the Forest Impact Accelerator. The Forest Impact Accelerator was launched by BirdLife in 2019, which aimed to provide support and some seed funding to incubate ideas for sustainable finance initiatives, SIFs, that deliver long-term biodiversity and community benefits for tropical forest landscapes. So SFIs are financial mechanisms that use NBS, nature-based solutions, to provide revenue for forest conservation in communities such as forest-positive agriculture enterprises, payment for environmental services, carbon projects, and so on. So every year we have a set of BirdLife partners that submit a proposal of ideas for sustainable investment, SFIs. And after a competitive process, a cohort of 5 to 10 teams are chosen to develop these unique SFIs. So what does the accelerator does, basically? So first, we provide very tailored and context-based capacity development to try to tackle some of the major challenges, which in the most cases is lack of financial management resources, for example, because sometimes that doesn't, there are not a very strong structure for it, and that is a huge challenge. And also, we really try to tailor this capacity development to specific needs and to specific sites and landscapes. We also provide seed grants for scoping, feasibility assessments, to create business and strategy development plans, and to scale up these SFIs. Additionally, we have collaborative training and learning platforms where we share lessons learned between the cohorts, we provide webinars with technical support, and also we do some profile raising and communications support to articulate and pitch their SFIs to investors, but also have access to them. Because this is one of the major issues for these many of local organizations, civil society organizations. Today, 4 years later, since we launched the accelerator, we have started 14 organizations, and we have helped build 6 new landscapes worldwide of forests of key biodiversity areas. We have leveraged $3 million in project funding and catalyzed impact for biodiversity, climate, and local communities across 1 million hectares of key BAs, key biodiversity areas. This sounds pretty nice, but it's important to also talk about the challenges. And even though there is tremendous funding for NBS nowadays, NBS is a very trendy topic, even though we struggle a lot to understand it. And I really like that we started the session to creating a baseline of what it is. Because even into the non-profit world, it's something as a concept that we're still trying to navigate in a more clear and concise way. There is funding, but investors do not want to fund NBS projects that doesn't have the feasibility studies done, the financial modeling showing the potential revenue, have certain institutional capacities. They want to fund projects that they have a confirmation or a trust that it will be safe for them, for their investments. So that's a huge project. And it's a bit difficult to navigate because in order for many of these projects to get all of these requirements, they need the money to get these requirements done and fulfilled. So that's a major challenge, and we need to find investors who have this risk appetite high enough to invest early stages, or finding donors that are willing to provide this upfront. This is a challenge that BirdLife is very keen to resolve, and we are working very hard with investors and trying to make these NBS projects more de-risked and bankable. And making projects bankable and building the capacity of partners towards investment readiness are two of the concepts which the accelerator is putting significant resources into now. So the 3 main takeaways of the accelerator. We have proof in these 4 years that the concept of accelerators providing seed funding actually works, is very high impact, but it has to be alongside very technical support that is tailored, integral, and really thinking about their input. We have to think about investment and capacity development not in a vertical structure. It has to be a horizontal structure where we are improving and making our investment system to be more effective while hearing about the needs on the ground, challenges on the ground, but most importantly, the weakness. And this is the strength, sorry. Because this is so important for us to have a more long-term impact in terms that local communities are going to be benefit. Biodiversity and climate is also going to be positively impacted. And we're going to get better at this and have better investments that are going to be more secured and long-term impact. Also, additionally, it's important to invest in national organizations who have national legitimacy, local commitment, and long-term vision to conserve their nature. And this is something that through capacity development is something that can be strengthened, because having that vision, having that empowerment is very powerful. But we need also have enabling conditions that actually can secure a lot of this investment to be done in a better way. And also, it takes time to see substantial financial flows into projects to become financially sustainable. We have to be a little bit more patient with that, and we need to change the investors' culture with that. From the project development process, from the initial idea to business case, to have the commercial scale-ups, to have ultimately financial stability takes time. In our experience, we see that it can take between 3 to 5 years for a project to get into this stage. I want to now to give the word virtually to Fabiana Benitez from Guaira Paraguay. The Guaira Paraguay is an excellent example of how a conservation organization has pivoted their approach to bring funds into their conservation projects in a way that leverage a lot of the interest from the private sector and other funding sources. So, if we can put on the video.
Guaira Paraguay es una ONG. Guaira Paraguay es una ONG local que trabaja en la compra de tierras para la conservación de la naturaleza. Manejamos de forma efectiva más de 36.000 hectáreas que están distribuidas en 5 ecosistemas importantes que albergan una biodiversidad única, y lo manejamos como áreas protegidas destinadas a conservación perpetua. Para el mantenimiento a largo plazo y permanente de estas tierras, la organización diseñó 2 estrategias de financiación a largo plazo. Una de ellas es un fondo fideicomiso, y la segunda, gracias al programa de la aceleradora, logramos crear y consolidar a Tángara, que es la empresa creada por Guaira Paraguay, cuyo fin es la comercialización de los productos y servicios que generamos en las áreas protegidas de Guaira Paraguay. La aceleradora nos enseñó realmente a las organizaciones conservacionistas cuán lejos podemos ir con capacidades en negocios primeramente. Y una de las cuestiones clave también que nos enseñó es cuán atractivo y viable puede ser un negocio si no solamente demuestras la rentabilidad del negocio, sino también todo el impacto positivo que se genera alrededor de estos. Nosotros ofrecemos productos como la yerba mate, miel, esencia de petit grain y servicios como el ecoturismo. Y son servicios y productos con un impacto positivo en la naturaleza y también en las poblaciones locales. No solamente como consumidor obtiene un producto de calidad, sino también al consumir uno está colaborando para la conservación a largo plazo de más de 36.000 hectáreas de áreas naturales en el país.
Coming into our little space here. So thank you, Fabienne, for that. Did you have any further comments based on what Fabienne said?
Well, besides the lovely background noise of
and the
birds,
green.
it's incredible what Guaira Paraguay has been done for years.
Yeah.
By establishing Tángara, they has leveraged over £1 million in developing other projects, including philanthropic money, sector, state. So it's an excellent example how just a bit of seed investment and some support can provide really effective. And now they're working with 36,000 hectares, working with a bunch of local communities, indigenous people, and there is impact not only by diversity, climate, but also to people, and that's critical.
It's incredibly inspiring, isn't it? And really speaks to the need to share and connect these projects across the world so that they can learn from one another and we can learn from them. So thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you, Fabienne, for that beautiful video. So we want to move to our 4th panelist, who I hope is still online. Oh, there you are. Wonderful. Hello, Diana. Could you tell us a bit about, explain to our online audience and to our audience in the room today what the Terracarta Accelerator is, and also then perhaps explain a little bit about what your research on the state of the markets has told you and has helped you shape the terms of reference for the accelerator. So yeah, over to you, please. Hopefully we can hear you.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm delighted to join the conversation this afternoon. So the Terracotta Accelerator is a Sustainable Markets Initiative program, which is made up of two aspects. One is the Accelerator program, and then the other is a fund which is going to invest in nature-based solutions and also nature tech companies that are achieving both commercial returns and also nature outcomes. And really the overarching objective of the entire program is to catalyse private sector funding into nature. Pollination overseeing the Accelerator program and is also acting as the general partner for the fund. The program itself is aiming to build capability and capacity in the early stage nature-based solution and tech companies that respond to the RFP and are successful in providing, in getting that support and also linkage back into the ecosystem across many of the actors that really are critical to build out the maturity of the market. The fund itself will invest globally, as I said, both in nature-based solutions and nature tech, in companies that have the potential to achieve both commercial returns for investors and also nature outcomes. It's targeting a first close of US $125 million at the beginning of next year, so it is quite substantive. It is at this stage all private capital and is likely to be backed by a number of large-scale multinationals who are very interested in participating in the initiative. Really, my observation is to build their knowledge of the market. They really do see this as an involving thematic for investors, for investment rather, and also potentially for their clients, and they want to understand. So they want to come on the journey quite early to be able to be at the forefront, not only for their own businesses, but also for their clients' business. So excited about that. And as I said, an RFP will be run in parallel to that close, likely to hit the market early next year. So fundamentally, the Accelerator has the same objective as many of the examples that have already been raised today. It's really to develop the market for nature investments. And it also builds and complements the other programs by integrating both projects and technologies, which is quite unique, and also having the program overlay against the pool of capital and also the diversity of the capital providers. It will be key, again, echoing a comment that I've heard other panelists say, the collaboration across the industry and also ensuring that there is a lot of in-market focus for the benefits and also the collaboration and capacity build to really assist with all of this componentry to catalyse the ecosystem. As it's well known, the investment market for nature is very nascent. It is evidenced by the lack of commercial models. The reliance at this stage on carbon is problematic from a growth perspective. You know, a deeper focus on the commerciality of the nature-based solutions and also these techs will assist in maturing the market, attracting capital earlier. Lack of scale is also a challenge, which does interlink somewhat to the commercial model dynamic and the demand and supply. So both from a financial flow perspective, but also from the nature-based solution and tech company dynamics is quite esoteric. So it's not, which is reflective and not surprising of the nascent nature of the markets. There's further work to be done there before there is more substantive capital flows, but of course that all does present an opportunity too. And I think that's what we're talking about today is how all of these accelerators are leaning into the market to develop it for what I'm sure we all want, which is a nature market that has got access to great pools of capital to be able to grow and scale. So that, you know, in terms of the collaboration, that is fundamental across all the various aspects of the industry, and also the involvement of the private sector earlier than later is a feature that we're quite excited about, because we feel that will accelerate the transition from being nascent to being more mature.
Thank you very much, Diana. That was all really interesting, and I'm sure we'll have more questions to ask you. I'm very happy to see that you have both marine and terrestrial ecosystems in your background, because the fear is sometimes that the markets are very, very narrowly focused on forests and forestry and huge problems around that, when obviously we need integrated solutions that cross both, marine and terrestrial ecosystems. So yeah, very good. That's great. So thank you all very much for your comments and sharing rich learning. So like several years of rich learning. It's really, really interesting state we're in now with this. But there's lots of various questions people might want to pose to the panelists. Can I give you an opportunity now? I think have we got a microphone, or is it this one? This is the microphone. Great. Okay. Well, I'll do that job then. Please briefly introduce yourselves when you speak.
Thank you very much. Fascinating presentations. I'm Peter Elwin, work for an organisation called Planet Tracker. We're a non-profit finance-focused think tank looking to shift financial behaviour towards positive things and away from negative things, in simple terms, and to do that to then influence the underlying systems, food systems being one. Loads of questions, so maybe if I just sort of quickly throw them all out, you can pick off the bits you like. Valuation, how do you value these things? How do you come up with a number? Is there any view of sort of liquidity in the future? I think Diana sort of mentioned that it's a very nascent market, but if it's a market at some stage, you're going to want to be able to move out of one solution potentially and get your money back while the solution continues. Time frame, how long do these things last? Are they short term? Are they long term? Does it vary? And then a couple of other questions as well, just to sort of throw them out. Pick whichever ones you like. Links to carbon markets, I think that got mentioned earlier, but wasn't clear to me. And then, of course, the famous sort of biodiversity credits, whether that's a good thing or not, and how does that relate to nature-based solutions? So lots of questions. Any answers, greatly appreciated. Thank you.
They were all very, very good questions. I was expecting somebody to bring up biodiversity markets and credits. So let's see if any of the panelists have a keenness to answer that one. Yes, would any of you like to start? Do you?
I can kick off.
Yeah, sure. Please do, Diana. Yeah.
So from a valuation perspective, we use a discounted cash flow valuation model. It's not without its challenges, but that is the primary tool that we use for valuation. It does come down to the robustness around the commercials and the understanding and the likelihood of that becoming realised, and obviously the discount rates. It is interesting because the discount rate is quite linked to the nascent market, and obviously on the nature-based solution opportunity set, the locations are typically in emerging and frontier markets, which also is an interesting sort of dynamic on the risk profile, let alone that the market itself is relatively immature. In terms of the time frame, so the fund that we are launching is a 15-year fund, which is quite long compared to others in the market in early stage investing, but that's really reflective of the maturity of the nature-based solution market and the view that it does need longer because of the development of the market, let alone the actual opportunity set. In terms of exit, that's something that we are keen to do, but as you're probably alluding to, there isn't a lot of evidence to support exits at this stage, unless you're looking at opportunities that are more linked to carbon and going down trading house route. I think that's more potentially challenging for the nature solutions, if that's really your primary objective, is to catalyse that segment of the market rather than trading carbon credits. So I think that is an area of the market that will evolve in our view. So that rattles off a couple of quick responses to the questions. The carbon markets, for the projects that we've had a preliminary look at, are one of the known commercial levers and revenue streams. I think that is, reflective of, again, the maturity of the market. We are hopeful that will evolve and there will be less dependency on that, because we don't think that that's going to be supportive to really growing the market if it's concentrated in terms of its linkage of revenue model just to carbon credits.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. Will, did you want to respond?
Yeah, lots of questions in there. Some might be worth continuing afterwards, but just a few thoughts before we move on to another question. in the valuation, that's one of the things that the projects we're working with will be working through this year. But I think we're expecting them all to be under $10 million as their initial what they're seeking. Some of them much less than that. And time frame wise, again, as you picked up, Natalie, one of the things we're really excited about the 6 that we're working with now is the diversity in there. So it's all each one is quite different. Which also leads on to the question of carbon and biodiversity and other revenue sources. Again, the spread of the projects, and indeed many other nature-based solutions projects that form a kind of wider cohort within our accelerator who have already got funding from other sources. There is a tremendous amount of learning from different sources, and from the sale of premium beef from a regenerative cattle in Peru to you made a point about biodiversity credits. One of the projects is trying to utilize in the UK the movement towards mandatory biodiversity net gain. So for those who maybe aren't familiar, large developments in the UK will be required. There's a slight wobble in the policy direction, but we think it will be confirmed will be required to have biodiversity net gain, which then requires them to find projects that are able to deliver that. And there's one of the projects with Water Resource East is trying to do that in adjacent to a project, and that will provide a really good insight into how that can work best. How's that going to deliver greatest benefit, and how can that support the growth of financing for nature-based solutions. The other point on time frame, of course, the reason we're interested in this, or maybe 2 reasons. One, we need to achieve larger scale, but we need to be supporting nature-based solutions that can have a sustainability long beyond what would be a grant cycle. So the whole point here, isn't it, is to try and find a way for projects to be able to perpetuate and self-sustain themselves, so that we don't go through a 5-year time cycle or 3-year time cycle and onwards.
Thank you very much. I think it's this sort of experimental mindset that's needed. We're just doing a lot of experiments out there in the world, and some are going to work really well, and we can try and replicate those, and others are going to fail. And I suppose that is a bit of a zeitgeist shift for the investor community to sort of say, well, there is no such thing as failure as long as we know why we went wrong, right? And then we can apply that knowledge to make sure the next project doesn't make the same mistakes and is more resilient to that whole adaptive management. But I appreciate that in the investor community, that's going to rule out quite a lot, and we're going to need this to really focus on that section of the investor community that has some appetite for risk, as has already been described, and who are committed to the long term, 15 years or more. And there are such investors out there, but there's that experimental mindset that's, I think, that's coming through from what you've said so far. Is there another question in the audience? Yes, of course. Let me just...
Thank you. So my name is Anna Tengberg, and I'm from Stockholm International Water Institute, and we're a policy institute. I was particularly interested in some of the lessons from the policy accelerator, because nature-based solutions, require that policymakers across sectors and scale also collaborate. So I'm wondering what your experiences are about that. How do you connect the water with the agriculture sector, etc., and the policymakers involved in that?
Absolutely brilliant question. Getting out of the silos from the policy space. Is this a question for you, Craig? Do you want to speak to that?
You started answering the question because yes, to make it work, you can't just have your peers from your same silo. You need peers from other silos as well. And notably, in the second of my examples, it was a nature to agriculture kind of relationship, right? So clearly those examples show that in that policy accelerator work, both the peer-to-peer as well as the research you do to help find what works and doesn't work has to cross silos. I just want to build on, though, implicit in your point is a couple things. One is, I have a sense that when most people, maybe even at the summit here, think of nature-based solutions, they're thinking of carbon, nature for carbon, right? And I think that's a bit of, you brought it up in your point that it's a bit of baggage we have to carry and try to throw off, because there's a lot of nature-based solutions that go beyond carbon. In fact, one of my colleagues, Aaron Gray, just wrote a paper looking at the size of different markets. It's actually the size of what we would call being liberal with the phrase nature-based solutions for water is actually quite, relatively speaking, it's quite sizable, right? The water funds in Latin America and stuff like that. And we do a lot of work at SWRI in urban areas and elsewhere with, the protecting natural ecosystems to help maintain clean drinking water, prevent flooding, et cetera, for urban areas. So One is is the water, since you're some Siwi, right? Is the water element there being so important? And secondly, it didn't come up, and it's part of maybe part of the previous question about growing markets or not. One of the things we've noticed in the Policy Accelerator and us other work we've done at DeBry is one thing that can hamper nature-based market is the fact that nature is unpredictable, and investors want predictability. And so when you look at a nature-based solution versus an engineered solution, you know, green versus gray, so to speak, one of the things that we found that pops up a lot is decision makers oftentimes have engineering backgrounds. They know the gray. They know they can trust it. They know if they do X amount of concrete, it'll have this type of, you know, whereas nature is, maybe that mangrove will come back, maybe it'll stay. You know, there's a bit more, maybe the trees will absorb that much or not. Nature is unpredictable, right? And that's how you factor that in, and the associated risk of that is one thing that if we want nature-based markets to really grow, we have to deal with that.
So that, I think, does it not speak to the need to sort of invest, again, going back to the landscape point, you invest in lots of different sorts of nature-based solutions across the landscape. Some may flourish and deliver probably even more than what you wanted, and others might fail, but they can work together, and then you bring technology in for very extreme contexts where actually, you know, nature is quite likely to get damaged by the next fire or the next storm, but you might have some engineered approaches blended. So sort of like we talk about multifunctional, flourishing multifunctional landscapes, and investors, I think, is a sort of a real, hopefully growing understanding that, you know, investing in an isolated project in a landscape is unlikely to be a very resilient or very good thing to do with your finance, and actually it's thinking much more broadly than that to buffer that. And I mean, I do hear those arguments all the time around, you know, the certainty of engineered, but then, you know, engineered solutions can't self-repair. They can't adapt. And, you know, so it's about, you know, making sure there's enough space and time for nature to be able to respond and adapt in that way. I think is really important. But again, probably a bit quite hard sell to the investor community. But then we can point out all the multiple benefits beyond the, say, the disaster risk reduction benefit or the carbon sequestration storage benefit. There's all those livelihoods and soil and air and all the rest of it, all these other things we get. So that's great. Thank you very much for that question. Do you have...
Hi, Eli Mitchell-Larsen from Carbon Gap and Oxford Net Zero. I think I really liked the point that was made about investing in companies that produce products that have an sort of innate value. But of course, so many of the amenities and value that nature-based solutions are providing are not something that someone as an off-taker will pay for at scale unless they have to. So we think a lot about how do we kind of codify the demand for things like biodiversity or all these other services and amenities that are provided, some of them which are hard to measure, some of them are problematic to measure, ultimately need to be kind of codified into legal systems so that someone has to pay for them. Do you have any favorite examples? And this could be anywhere in the world, whether it's where the projects are cited or, you know, in Europe or elsewhere, of these kinds of codifications taking place where investors then have certainty that they can invest in a company because they know it will have an off-taker for the solutions that it's providing. Thank you.
Another really great question. Does anyone feel like tackling that one? Diana, Will? Is twitching slightly, Will?
I was
Do you want to
wondering
go
if
for
Diana
it?
might have a good example, but
Yeah.
I mean, one emerging one is the biodiversity net gain that I've just referred to. I'm aware in Chile as well, and indeed in Colombia, rather than a straightforward carbon tax approach, they have a policy where companies who might pay a carbon tax has the option instead to invest in the restoration of forests, or in Colombia they use a carbon tax to kind of to invest in Herencia Colombia, which is their national protected areas and sustainable landscape scheme. So there are different models in different parts of the world that I think have created those schemes. And indeed, one of the examples that Craig gave was where, you know, I was talking about the need for policy to create other markets and revenues. There's, you know, in El Salvador, I think that's kind of what's been going on, right? It's creating the policy systems that enable a payments for ecosystem service to go in. So maybe, Craig, you want to come in on that?
Please do, Craig.
On that, I mean, thinking broadly about this, there are a number of policies out there that are basically embedding some type of what we would call a public good, whether it's biodiversity values or whatever, but it's not trying to put a market price or tradability on that natural commodity. The EUDR, for instance, right, is a form of that, right? The EU deforestation regulation, right? Implicit in the regulation that thou shalt not import into European soil agricultural products that are associated with deforestation after a certain date. Implicit in that is we want those ecosystems and its biodiversity to stay intact. Now, there's no valuation involved of biodiversity, et cetera. It's just a straight-on line, right? And embedded in it and hidden in that directive is that we value the biodiversity in Brazil, et cetera, right? I mean, sometimes those are good old-fashioned regulation. U.S. Endangered Species Act, right? It didn't have to put a price on the bald eagle and the American alligator and stuff like that. It just said, we as a society value this. It's a big number. We don't know what it is. We'll just make a regulation. And implicit in those types of regulations is what we're talking about.
Thank you. That's really great. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I have one more example. The accelerator has enabled Burung Indonesia to develop this payment for ecosystem services mechanism where the private sector companies donate to a water fund for local farmers to restore the forest and protect certain areas that will enable healthy watersheds for healthy water. So this is a way where water is being a commodity where that supports local communities that will provide and is fully funded by the private sector.
Great, thank you for that example. I don't know, Diane, Will, did you have anything to add to that? Or no, Will, Diane?
The only additional comment that I'd make is that the introduction of policies of that nature that would underpin demand and give certainty would obviously accelerate the development of the market. So I think our house view is that this market will move from nascent to more evolved through time. It's really a question of what is that timing, and the more that there is policy and regulatory certainty, the quicker it is. So we are, whilst we acknowledge sometimes there is some unintended consequences when these type of mechanisms are used, on balance, we are a strong supporter of it because we believe that will develop the market more rapidly for all of the funding that we so desperately need to develop these solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any more questions or comments from the floor? Okay.
Thanks very much. I'm Kelly Toole, the Global Director of Climate Change for Save the Children International. And in the beginning, in the introduction, you talked about nature-based solutions being about protecting nature and also benefiting local communities. And I'm keen to learn more about the community side of things. How do we make sure that communities benefit from both the protected ecosystems and the funding flows that come through? This is a big focus of the work as Save the Children that we do in nature-based solutions, and ensuring that communities and children in particular benefit from these approaches. So keen to learn from others on that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really happy you asked that question. And if no one else is going to ask it, I was going to also to discuss that, because in this very space, we've had some amazing sessions on the importance of local communities and the importance of not just involvement of indigenous peoples and local communities, but their active leadership and participation in it. So how do you ensure that flows of finance get to the people who need it most in the forms that they need it most? It'd be great. Yeah, I can see both of you keen to answer that. So we'll go for you, Lucia, first, please. Thank you.
Well, I'm biased because this is something super important for us, and this is one of the things that we think more whenever we're developing any conservation project in BirdLife, but especially this accelerator, because we go under the belief that the communities and the projects on the ground are in the forefront of where nature needs the most investment. And how does that work is when people, local communities and indigenous people are not only involved, are consulted and have a huge part of the decision making. So a lot of this investment even goes to specific groups for women, for example, right? That when we invest in women, we're also investing in the kids in most direct ways. And in final ways that these funds will benefit their livelihoods. And that is an essential piece of NBS. It's not about nature. It's nature being used as a solution for mitigation, adaptation, and climate change, and that who is going to be mostly affected, which are local communities, indigenous people, and kids. And that provides a whole other ecosystem services, health, the mental health. It's another big thing that sometimes we don't talk enough when we're talking about how investment in NBS projects can affect. But it's just putting them in the center of the decision making and the project concepts, and taking that into consideration with whom is going to be invested better. And at the end, it's local communities that are going to provide more effective long-term results.
Thank you very much.
I just
Yeah.
add to that. I mean, you
Please
more or
do.
less said what I was going to say. I'd add to that just one more thing we've learned from the Policy Accelerator, two things to ensure that. One is procedural equity, making sure that the people that live in and around the areas affected are part of the planning, design, implementation from the get-go. So procedural equity. Secondly is tenure security, right? Which will then, you get those two things right, the benefits will flow, right? And the communities will be bought in. So again, it's a procedural equity and tenure security. Two fundamental things we've learned.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've got time for one more question or observation from the floor before we turn back to our panelists. Please do. Yeah, let me give you the microphone.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Sememo Kun. I'm from Nigeria. I work with Quebec Kase Women Development and Resource Center. We are based in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, and that is where oil and gas extraction activities is going on. Because of the extractive activities, the ecosystem is degraded because lands are taken from communities and from the indigenous people, and the lands are polluted because of the oil drilling, because of oil spilling into farmlands. Water bodies are also polluted. The air is polluted. And we are talking about involvement of communities. Oftentimes, when we talk about community consultation, it's mainly with the chiefs and not with other community members, especially the women. And where I come from and where I work, traditionally, women do not participate in decision making, which is part of the focus of my organization, mobilizing women to participate and also advocating to community stakeholders to include women and other marginalized population. And when we talk about community involvement, at times it is just to inform communities about projects and communities not fully and meaningfully participating. And when communities don't participate, they don't have a sense of ownership in the project. So talking about nature-based solutions, communities will have to be involved. Communities will need to have sense of ownership in the project. Otherwise, there will be no sustainability. We have a lot of projects in communities which does not really impact on community members. And communities don't see it as their project. They see it as a project of either the NGO or the development partners or the government. So how do we really integrate community interests and concerns when designing projects and when implementing?
Again, thank you so much. I think that's incredibly important. It's not just about paying lip service to involvement, is it? It's about deeply embedding local communities in the entire process and learning from them and enabling leadership. Thank you. So thank you. And in particular, that a lot of the knowledge is often within the marginalized groups. A lot of the knowledge about how to do this well, about how to work with nature, is in the women, in the communities of women. And yet, as you say, they often have the least power. They have power through their knowledge. So empowering women is a key part of a successful nature-based solutions. And I think across all the projects that you're all involved with, there are some really striking examples of that from what I understand. We're very close to the end. So it's my job as chair to just beg you to be very brief as I ask you just very, very quickly, maybe 30 seconds each, just to look ahead, what's coming up in 2024, 2025, and that you see as important or important opportunity with your accelerator. Do you want to go, Craig?
My 30 seconds of fame. I'd say yes to everything that you said,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's fundamentally important. But I think we've talked about a lot of gaps here. At least one thing we're seeing from the Policy Accelerator, the gap is demand, right? Whether it's on carbon or other things. How do you stimulate that demand? I think we as a community need to be thinking hard about how do you stimulate demand.
Okay, thank you very much. Diane, your 30 seconds or 20.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I suppose not dissimilar to the previous remark, this is an enormous opportunity. It is something that everyone is committed to, and, ensuring that there is the collaboration across demand and supply and importantly involving the private sector early along with, as we just heard, the fundamental role that communities play, I think we'll achieve quicker results and better results rather than, engaging those type of players later on in processes. So I think getting supply and demand together early and being highly collaborative will accelerate getting the investable market up and going.
Thank you very much, Lucia.
Well, the long-term goal for the accelerator is to have an incubation of a pipeline of 50 SFIs to contribute the conservation and restoration of key forests across 43 priority landscapes, generation of forest protective market-based revenues, and also be able to replicate this model and expand this model to our 119 partners in 115 countries, but not only to them, to other type of stakeholders and other organizations to motivate. We've been here doing this for 4 years, so there's still a lot to learn, but we're really excited for what we've been achieving, and it's just investing in the right places.
Great, thanks. Good to hear of the high ambition, much needed. Thank you. And Will, final word to you at the end of the session.
Thank you, Natalie. So first of all, I thank you to Natalie for chairing, and for Craig, Lucia, and Diana for joining, and also to Claire and Jen, who are somewhere back in the UK but helped make this event happen. One of the things we really wanted to do was to try and open up what it sometimes feels like a black box about what accelerators are doing, what funds are doing, and everybody's contributed fantastically to that. And I think the more we can do that, the better. So at the end, you'll see the slide again with has a QR code, which will share some of the knowledge products that I've spoken about, but also an article that talks about the lessons that I articulated earlier in more detail. But what's coming up then, that fantastic team that I referred to, we've got some exciting stuff for this year. Obviously, delivering the package of support that I referred to those 6 projects. I forgot to mention seaweed in the Philippines with WWF Philippines, I think. But we're also shortly going to release a guide on how nature-based solution projects can connect their reporting to international standards of corporate reporting like TNFD, which will help strengthen the connectivity there and build the business case for those projects from a corporate and investor point of view. Secondly, we're collaborating with Oxford University on a paper to outline what high-integrity MBS insetting could look like and how that might be an opportunity for growing high-integrity nature-based solutions in future, and working with our colleagues on training packages and pilot packages to the finance sector to help address that barrier that I mentioned earlier about capacity in financial institutions to understand and to look at nature-based solutions. So we're very much trying to build on that knowledge, not only in the support we provide to projects, but to engage with the finance sector and build a bridge between the two. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.